Welcome to the San Jose Peace and Justice Center. As may have been already mentioned, the restroom is down the hall and to the left. And the San Jose Peace and Justice Center, for those who don't know, has been here ever since 1957. So we are celebrating our 65th, 66th anniversary of this center. Not necessarily in this location, but the San Jose Peace Center was founded 66 years ago. And my name is Sharat Lin, and let me tell you a little bit about myself. So I am a political economist, in the sense that I've written articles, although by training I'm a medical researcher. And I have spent a lot of time in the Middle East, studying the Middle East, writing about it. And I partly went to school at the American University in Beirut, Lebanon. I worked in Saudi Arabia, lived for a little while in Iran. So I have a reasonable familiarity with the Middle East. I was there in the Arab Spring uprising in 2011. I was in Tahrir Square off and on for 2 months, and so I've seen a lot of the action. When I was in Lebanon, I was there at the beginning of the Lebanese Civil War. So actually, so that leads me to the first story. I want to tell a story that I have never told before. And because we have seen on October 7th the Hamas attack into the settlements, the Israeli settlements, just on the other side of the border of Gaza, and I understand the anguish of the relatives. I mean, we really have to put ourselves in the shoes of the relatives, the families, on both sides, of the relatives of the Israelis who were across that border, the civilians, and of course in a much greater magnitude the Palestinians in Gaza who are suffering this assault, and the dimensions of the assault are, I think, need to be really examined to try to understand what are the real intents of the Israeli operation. And so we understand that anguish, and I have some experience with that because I myself was. And I've not told this story because I wasn't sure that it would be something that would help me explain the situation in the Middle East. But I just thought, in case someone says that, well, you don't understand what it's like to be captured by a militia. And what you have to go through. So I was in fact captured by a Palestinian militia that was based in Syria. This happened in 1973, and I was captured for 24 hours, and I understand why they did it. It was because I was as a young photojournalist. I was going around in Beirut, with an area called Al Matar, which is the area around the airport, and I was photographing the damage, the war damage that around the airport. So these are residential buildings, not the airport itself, but the residential buildings, about 12-story towers made out of brick and concrete. And I didn't know that there was a militia that was based in this particular building. They signaled me to come over, and they took me in and held me against my will. And it was a very scary experience. But I understood why they were concerned, because it was for them it's it is a security facility, and it was a state of war, because this was the real beginning of the Lebanese Civil War back in 1973. I mean, officially, it doesn't really begin until 1975, but in 1973 I saw the active partitioning of the city of Beirut into different sectors of control. And if you wanted to go from one sector of the city to another, you had to pass through a series of checkpoints. And there was also curfew. So when I was released by the militia, I was walking back home to my dormitory at the American University in Beirut, and I was in violation of the curfew because of the time that I was released. And so the Lebanese army picked me up and threw me into jail for another night. So I got arrested on both from both sides. Well, it was not there were many sides. There were not just two sides, right? It was not just the government versus the Palestinians. It was the Phalange, and there were so many other groups that were jostling for control of Lebanon. But I understood why it happened, because they were worried about spies. They were worried about U.S. intelligence. They were worried about U.S. agents operating in Lebanon at that time. And I just want to say that it was a very scary experience, because there was a point where they played a Russian roulette with me, and I didn't know whether I would get out of there. But it was. But I understood that this was a struggle for their survival. It was part of a struggle of the Palestinian people for their liberation. And 1973 was just 3 years after something called Black September. So a lot of these militias had been expelled from Jordan because they were arming themselves. They were preparing for military operations, and the Jordanian government, and then under the father of the current King Hussein, unleashed a reign of terror that killed many Palestinians in Jordan. And so these people, a lot of Palestinians then fled. I mean, they were already refugees. Being in Jordan, they were refugees from the Nakba from 1948, and they fled Jordan into Syria, and then some of them came into Lebanon. So it's like there were multiple forced migrations that happened here. Anyway, so that's enough for that. I want to talk about some of the background to what's happening today, because a lot of people are asking about what is the background, what is the history to what is happening. Remember that if you look at the news media and they say, well, Israel has the right to defend itself against the Hamas attack that took place on October 7th, as if October 7th was the beginning of this situation. And of course, it is not. So what Hamas was doing on October 7th was that, first of all, it's a response to what has been happening in Israel Palestine for about 100 years. It's not more than that, but it's not less than that. So remember that this conflict is not something that is ancient. It doesn't go back thousands of years. Palestinians, or I should say, Christians and Muslims and Jews and Druze and all the peoples of the Middle East who lived under the Ottoman Empire actually lived in remarkable harmony. And there were you can see the remnants of the documents of people in, for example, Jaffa and Haifa where Jews and Muslims and Christians lived side by side, and they had shops right next to each other. They had residents right next to each other, and they would they would buy from each other, and it was all going very well, and this was also true in other parts of the Ottoman Empire. So, for example, the Armenians, the conflict between the Armenians and the Turks, this was not a problem during the time of the Ottoman Empire. When the Ottoman Empire collapsed, that was when the Armenian genocide happened in 1915, and because of the rise of Turkish nationalism. And it's the same thing in Palestine, that they live together, and the real beginning of this, in any substantive way, is the rise of the World Zionist movement, led by Theodor Herzl, who convened the first World Congress of Zionism in 1897 in Basel, Switzerland, and it's not staying on. And that launched a campaign to turn Palestine into a Jewish homeland. And I mean, there were some other places that were also considered. So one was Uganda, but there was an acknowledgement, even at that time, that there was a challenge, because all of these places had people already there. These were not empty lands. And the Zionist movement actually did not really gain traction in terms of encouraging migration to Palestine until the Holocaust. So when the Holocaust, and obviously there was this huge pressure that Jews were fleeing Central Europe. They needed places to go, and the World Zionist Organization and the Jewish Agency, which were active in promoting immigration to Palestine, which was then under the British mandate, were discouraging them, or certainly not giving them any assistance if they wanted to go to America, go to Canada, go to Britain, but they were only giving that assistance if they chose to go to Palestine. Let's back up a little bit to 1916. So 1916 was the year that we have the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, and the British and the French, being the two major colonial powers, were looking at these areas that were sort of relinquished by the Ottoman Empire, and they were trying to figure out, okay, so how do we divide up the pie? So the foreign ministers of France and Britain, Sykes and Picot, got together, and they signed in secret the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which was to divide up the area that is today is 5 countries, right? It's at least 5. So it gave to France Lebanon and Syria, and it gave to Britain Palestine, Jordan, and Iraq. And the British recognized it as Palestine. That's what they called it. And the Balfour Declaration, under pressure, Britain signed the Balfour Declaration, declaring that Britain would support in some form the creation of a Jewish homeland in the region. So what this started was that when the there was some Jewish migration that was coming in until but there was the beginnings of also of Arab resistance, okay, to the immigration. So there were also Arab uprisings. The most significant of these Arab uprisings was in 1929, and then several other times and then a big one in 1936. And it forced the British to limit migration to Palestine. I also want to say that there was also a global effort to get the imperial powers. The sound is not coming. Can you hear that? I don't hear it. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. So the British were putting up in response to pressure from the native Palestinian population in Palestine, were beginning to put up some resistance to unlimited migration, and this led to Jewish militias, Zionist militias, starting to ramp up their attacks first on Palestinians, and then on targets of British colonialism. And so there were attacks on infrastructure, and then probably one of the most famous ones, of course, was the bombing of the King David Hotel. It's very interesting to look at the origins of these militias. So the first one that was the major one that was formed was the Haganah, that was formed in 1920, and for many of the Zionist fighters, it was not militant enough. And so they went off and formed their own. So the one of the major ones that split off from the Haganah was the Irgun Tzvai Leumi, or National Military Organization. And then the Irgun Tzvai Leumi, of whom some of the leaders of some of these groups you know very well today. So Menachem Begin was a leader of the Irgun Tzvai Leumi, or just for short, people know it as the Irgun. And then some people thought, well, that's not, they're not militant enough. So the Lehi was formed in 1936, and the Haganah itself had leaders, the commanders of the Haganah included many future prime ministers, okay, including Yitzhak Rabin, Ariel Sharon, Yigal Alon. So these became people who came into the mainstream, and these were regarded by the British as terrorist organizations. Okay, but they had a cause. They were not terrorists in the sense of just simply doing something because they wanted to create terror, right? They were trying to do what they thought would be to disrupt the British limitations on immigration and terrorize Palestinians to leave their homes. Okay, and that accelerated in 1948 after the United Nations voted for the partition of Palestine in November of 1947. That is this map that you see here. And if you look closely at it, this map is quite different from the current boundaries. And so the most important thing is that if you look at these yellow areas, or orange areas, those were the areas that were awarded to a future Palestinian state. The green areas are to the future Jewish state. And you see that for one thing, Gaza is a much larger area. It included all this land going inland. The West Bank, well, the West Bank was this. The boundaries are somewhat different from the West Bank today. And then there was also this section up here in the north, which included areas around Nazareth, because there are a lot of Palestinians in Nazareth. The other thing to keep in mind is that in 1947, what was the balance of population in Palestine? So the Jewish population had been steadily increasing since the beginning of the century, and in 1947 it had reached 1/3 of the total. So 1/3 of the people in this land were Jewish, and 2/3 were non-Jewish, Muslim, Christian, and Druze. And Bedouin, yeah. And of course, and Jerusalem was set aside by the United Nations as an international city. So the status of all these was yet to be determined, right? In terms of how would Jerusalem be governed. Would it be an international city? Would it be jointly governed? This was left up to the future. But that happened, and anyway, the Zionist militias accelerated their attacks on Palestinian villages and towns in what Palestinians today know as a Nakba, the catastrophe. And in that Nakba, there were some 530 villages that were cleansed of Palestinians. The total population that was expelled from their homes was about 750,000, and the largest town that was cleansed was Jaffa, which is just south of Tel Aviv. And Jaffa was before that was a town where Jews and Muslims lived together, and there's about 30,000 Palestinians live there who were expelled from their homes, and yeah, I don't think that. I mean that was not the main narrative. The main narrative was never about coming back. So it was more about get out and that we're just taking over. So that was not the main narrative. I mean, if somebody said that, it may have been just to, on a case-by-case basis, to get people to move out of their homes and then seize control. Yeah. And there are Palestinians whom I have met who have gone back to Jaffa and said, okay, that used to be our family home, and of course it's now there are now Jewish families living there, and so that is the how the Jewish state came into being, and so it really has a terrorist origin. In the same sense that we talk about Hamas, is that it was not terrorist in the sense of being senseless, but terrorist in the sense of using deadly force to expel people, to take control over the land. Now, in the early years of the Zionist state, there was a characterization of the conflict between Palestinians and Israelis as not as an Israel-Palestine conflict, but as an Israel-Arab conflict. And I think that was deliberate. I mean, of course, the circumstances were different in those days, because in those days you had the neighboring Arab countries, in particular Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, being hostile, and also having armies that they could mobilize, and of course that we saw that in the wars in 1967 and 1973, where Israel faced the Arab armies of Egypt and Syria. Certainly, Lebanon considered itself to be a neutral state, kind of like the Switzerland of the Middle East. And when I went there, it was still thought of, Lebanese still thought of themselves as the Switzerland of the Middle East because of neutrality. They didn't want to get involved in the conflicts. It was the banking center of the Middle East at the time, and you had skiing in the mountains. So there was, up through the war in 1973, there was the Arab states, at least the frontline Arab states, were in a military confrontation with Israel. But there was another reason. There was another reason for that characterization, which is, if you think back about Golda Meir making the statement about who are the Palestinians, and she says, well, there were never any Palestinians. There's no such thing as Palestinians. And what she meant was not to deny the existence of non-Jewish people in this land in Palestine, but rather to say that they are Arabs. And if they are Arabs and all these surrounding countries are Arabs, why don't these other Arab countries take the Palestinians? Why don't they take these people so that we can have all the land? And that narrative is still being used today, right? Because some of the members of Netanyahu's cabinet have said that why don't Egypt and Jordan and Syria take the Palestinians of Gaza? We would get rid of the problem if you take these 2 million people, then we don't have to bomb them, we don't have to kill them. And the problem with that is, of course, is that is exactly what Israel wants, is to expel the people so that it can take over the land. And but there was never such a thing as a land without a people, for a people without a land. So anyway, I should go back here to say that the fighting that took place, the Nakba, and then all the fighting that took place resulted in a ceasefire line that actually did not settle down until 1950. So a couple of years after the formation of the state of Israel. And the borders were redrawn, and the Palestinian state that emerged in 1950 was substantially smaller than the UN partition lines. Okay, so those lines, which you see here, so these lines, this is often called the green line. So the green line is the boundary that existed in 1967. So in the Six-Day War, June 1967, Israel took control of Gaza, the West Bank, Golan, and the Sinai Peninsula. Okay. Yeah, so there's a little section there. And
and these boundaries, particularly the boundary of the West Bank, has been shifting eastwards, because when Israel started building the wall, it started building that wall in some cases quite deep into the West Bank. And the reason for, one of the reasons for building deep into the West Bank was because you have all these settlements. So this is the situation in 1993. This is the West Bank in 1993, and what you see here, what I want you to get out of this is that the brown areas, even though this was allocated to Palestine, to a future Palestinian state, the brown areas are areas of Israeli military control. The blue areas are the dark blue areas are Israeli settlements, even back in 1993. This is the time of the Oslo Accords. And then the light blue areas are allocated for settler agriculture, and what are otherwise officially known as the settlement blocks. So between settlement blocks and Israeli military zones, there was a swath of the West Bank in 1993 that was off limits to Palestinians, even from that time. By the time we come to the present, so this is more or less contemporary. This is a few years ago, and of course it just gets worse year by year. But the green dots are just indicators. I mean, there are a lot more. The green dots are some of the major settlements, and I say major because, I mean, for example, Ma'ale Adumim is like 60,000 people. So that is a very large, and it's growing because there are other settlements around it that they are what's happening is these settlements are growing together. It's like suburban growth. As they grow, they come together and fuse, and that's going to create eventually the way things are going, it's going to create a settlement zone that is solid, almost out to Jericho. Okay, and that of course will bifurcate the West Bank. The number of settlers who are now living to the east of the Green Line is something like 700,000, and that includes East Jerusalem. What you see in East Jerusalem with the Israeli expulsions of Palestinians from a number of zones, but the ones that have been in the news lately have included Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan, but that's just the tip of the iceberg, because there's been a lot of house demolitions, and you can see whole swaths of Jerusalem that are on the Israeli side of the wall that have been cleared because the villages there have already been demolished. And so this is an ongoing slow Nakba. The Israeli narrative on why they're doing the demolitions, of course there are several, but one of them is a collective punishment, right? So if a Palestinian is accused of attacking an Israeli soldier, they don't even have to kill it doesn't have to be a murder, but if they are accused of attacking or some kind of insurrection, the punishment is not just getting arrested and thrown into in most cases administrative detention. So administrative detention means that there are no charges. The military does not have to make any charges, and that person can be kept for 6 months, and then the administrative detention can be renewed. It can be renewed over and over again until it's for all practical purposes it's indefinite. Okay, so I didn't explain what these other colors are. So these colors are as a result of the Oslo process. The Oslo process was in essence, it was not in essence a peace process. It was in essence a process of relieving Israel of the military challenges of governing the West Bank by transferring a certain level of control to the Palestinian Authority. And the Palestinian Authority is run by the major party. The Fatah is the major party there, and these dark blue areas. These dark blue areas are the area A. So the area A are the cities, the Palestinian cities, okay, including Hebron. Although Hebron is an exception, I'll get to that in a moment. Bethlehem, Jericho, Nablus, Jenin, and then the light blue areas are the suburbs, villages, but areas of theoretically joint control, joint PA, Palestinian Authority, and Israeli military control. And then the rest is Area C. Area C is pure Israeli military control. And that's different from Israel itself, which is civilian administration. So we got different kinds of administration. But in all cases, the Israeli military has superior authority. So what we're seeing increasingly in the past few years, as the government in Jerusalem, the Israeli government in Jerusalem, has continued to shift to the right, is that the Israelis, the IDF has been going into Area A to conduct raids, and these raids are becoming more brazen, they're becoming more frequent, they're becoming more brutal. It isn't to say that these raids didn't happen before. In 2002, the Israeli military took full military control of the entire West Bank. They went into all the cities. There was the famous siege of the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem for something like 40 some days, and yeah. No, there were many. So there were sieges of many areas, but that was one that was, because it's such a landmark for Christians, it was remembered. But anyway, so in the recent couple of years, there have been so many raids into Jenin, particularly in the refugee camp, the major refugee camp in Jenin, into Nablus, Tulkarm, Kalkilia. All of them have been raided. And the way that these raids are happening, remember that some of these areas are old areas, or they are so-called refugee camps. Refugee camps are areas that in 1948 the United Nations set up areas that could receive refugees, and they put tents there. But because people have been living there now for decades, these things have become permanent. So gradually over time, people have built houses, and they have built houses without the kind of the ordinary kind of urban planning, and so you have places that are extremely dense, extremely unplanned. The streets are very narrow, and so when Israel now makes raids into these areas, it cannot bring the heavy armored vehicles into these refugee camps. And so it just uses a brute force method, which is to use these armored bulldozers. An armored bulldozer, being about that wide, and it just goes right into the houses and carves out a path for the soldiers and the military vehicles to then come in and do whatever they want. So it's a very brutal process that is going on, and this is accelerating, and you have the settler attacks. The settlers are more brazen. It used to be that if settlers wanted to build a settlement, they would have to get permits the government has to approve that in some way that the settlement is to be built, and one way that it used to be was that they would do something called, they wouldn't call it a settlement, they would call it an outpost, a settlement outpost. You go and put a tent, you put a trailer, or you build a small building and call that a settlement outpost. That creates a fact on the ground that they can go to the government and say, you see, that we have a stake there, and let us turn this into a settlement. That's no longer the case. Now it's just they're from the highest levels of the government. We have right-wing ministers who are encouraging settlers to just go in there, and if they need to they want to attack Palestinians, Palestinian farmers, the Israeli the IDF is at their side, and protecting the settlers and not doing anything at all to defend the Palestinians from these attacks. So this is sort of the background to what's happening right now, the background to October 7th. October 7th does not come out of a vacuum, and it's something that Palestinians have become, are extremely worried about. What's the future? Because if this goes on, and it seems to be, it's not just going on, it's accelerating. That's the problem. It's accelerating. It's getting worse and worse, and so we will be seeing, another Nakba, and because we've got almost 4 million people here, the 2.3 million people there, it's another Nakba on an even larger scale than what had been seen before. So okay, so let me come to Gaza.
While you're putting that map up, I also want to include that during this time period, the settlers and the Zionists have been going into the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the third holiest place for the Muslims, and desecrating it and saying that they're going to tear it down and build a third temple. And the Palestinians are seeing this happen, which outrages them. And this is, of course, not the first time that the Al-Aqsa Mosque has been desecrated, and that there's a threat that they're going to tear it down and build a third temple.
Yeah, that's quite so. So the story of Gaza is that, every time I look at it, the population increases, because people are, the population growth, it happens when people are insecure, and so that's certainly the case in Gaza, and to understand, what the situation is, think of this: the city of San Jose is about that big. The entire city limits of San Jose are, no, I'm sorry, it's a little bit bigger. So Gaza is smaller than the city limits of San Jose. Okay, So that's this, and people cannot go beyond this boundary because Israel controls all of these boundaries. It controls the sea, it controls the border with Israel. There is a wall here with Egypt, and Egypt, has physical control of the Rafah crossing, but Israel calls the shots. Okay, this is something the news doesn't tell you. That if you go into the Rafah crossing, there are some television monitors there, or there are cameras there that provide live images to Israeli security, and they can veto anything that goes through the Rafah crossing. So that's why Israel had to give approval before any fuel could be let in through the Rafah crossing. The other thing is that the Rafah crossing is intended as a pedestrian crossing. It's not ever intended to be a vehicle for large trucks. And when shortly after October 7th, when the world was first talking about getting humanitarian aid into Gaza, the first negotiations were for 20 large trucks to cross Rafah, but that is peanuts compared to what normally the normal number of trucks that enter Gaza to supply its daily needs. And according to UNRWA, the United Nations Works and Relief Agency, that is responsible for the welfare of these Palestinians and for the refugee camps, the normal number of trucks that's needed for just basically subsistence is 500 trucks per day. So 20 trucks was nothing, and still we are nowhere near to bring 500 trucks in a day. And the Rafah crossing actually doesn't have the capacity for that. So I have proposed that another crossing that has the infrastructure, which is the Kerem Shalom crossing, be used for that, and it's within Israeli territory, so Israel can control what goes through. They can inspect it. The other thing is that the Gaza used to, when in previous times when I went to Gaza, there were many crossings, and some of them were freight only, some of them were people only. But I'll just go through them. So there's Rafah, which is open sometimes. Kerem Shalom, which is closed. Sufa, which is closed, it doesn't exist anymore. The Israelis demolished it. The Kisufim, which is demolished, it's erased. Nahal Oz, right? Erez is the normal people crossing between Israel and Gaza, but that was closed since October 7th. And Eli Sinai was used mostly for the settlements, the Israeli settlements that used to be there. So this prison, it has become, it was not always that way, but it has become this world's largest open air prison for that reason, is that nobody can get in or out. And I also want to say, just to give you some of the sense of the scale, how big of an operation UNRWA is. UNRWA has 13,000 employees. 13,000 employees are involved in relief operations, continuing to this day, relief operations in Gaza. So the Gaza city is the major city. The Ashifa Hospital is near the coast here. And we have just seen, I just looked at the New York Times today. New York Times has an article saying that it has it has examined, the New York Times correspondents have examined the projectile fragments that hit the Shifa hospital, and these are of Israeli origin. So this is the New York Times saying that conclusively the projectiles the bombs that hit Shifa are Israeli. They are not from Hamas. And then this road. So there's one road, Saladin Road, that runs through the center of Gaza. That is the main. It's the only road that is sort of a through road by which internally displaced persons can walk to the south. And of course, the south is getting bombed, so it's absurd. And some people, only a trickle of people, are walking on the beach along the coast.
What is the scale of this map?
Okay. Well, okay. So, all right. Okay. So this is okay. Here's miles. So that's 5 miles. 5. So it's less than 20 miles. So it's about 18 miles from one end to the other. Okay. Yeah. It's mostly flat. It's mostly relatively flat. Yeah. I mean, there are little hills, but nothing. Pretty flat. And then I mean, there are so many problems here because there's saline intrusion from the Mediterranean Sea into the water table. So if you dig a well and you pump the water out, it's salt water. I mean, it's just undrinkable. So when there's no electricity, there's no way to purify the water. And so this is what people are living under. Is not only they don't have food, but they don't have drinking water. And what does Israel do for the even the solar panels? The solar panels on top of a Shifa hospital were shot at by Israeli forces, because
Also,
yeah.
people put these big tubs, these big bins,
Mm.
black bins on top of their roofs
Yeah.
for water. So
Yeah.
water trucks come in and deliver water on a daily basis. And the Israeli soldiers, not just now, but over time, also was
Yeah.
shoot holes into them
Yeah.
so that the water.
Yeah.
But for the tall buildings, those apartment buildings, they have those up on the top, and you need pumps.
Mhm. Right.
You need pumps to pump the water.
Right.
To have electricity.
Right.
They can't pump the water.
Right. Yeah. So Israeli soldiers have been shooting at the tanks. There was also a large reservoir that is it's a big cylindrical reservoir that's sitting on the ground that they blew that up, and then there was a flood of water in Gaza City a few days ago. I think it was probably a couple of weeks ago. But so the water cannot be pumped up to the top. The tanks are up at the top because then you don't need electricity to have pressure at your water tap, because it just flows down. So that's sort of the situation in Gaza, and I think.
Also like to say that on the sea,
Mhm.
the Israeli Navy controls the sea, so
Mhm.
Palestinian fishers can't go out and fish.
Mhm.
So Gaza is also being shelled from the sea. In 2000 and something, I forget when, and I forget what country gave the money to build a airport. It operated, I think, from 2003 until 2005, and Israel bombed the airport, so there was no more any airport in Gaza, which totally made it like a concentration camp, an open air prison. Nothing, no person, nothing goes in or out without the permission of Israel, and Israel only allows just the bare minimum of food, so that the people don't starve. Just above the amount so you don't starve. But when I lived there in 2008 for 4 months, 80% of the children were anemic because they weren't getting enough food.
Yeah. So the thing is yeah. So there is an airport. If you look at Google Maps, you can actually see the runway here. The problem is that Israel controls the airspace. So anything that flies, Israel will shoot down. If Israel does not give approval, it will shoot it down. So it sort of doesn't make any difference that airfield is out of commission. So it requires a treaty. It requires some kind of an international agreement to get Israel to accept access in and out of Gaza. So that comes to the solution. So the solution is not to go in and purge Gaza of Hamas. First of all, the question is it even possible to remove Hamas from Gaza, or for that matter from the West Bank? So let's go back. Let's go back to 2006. I mean, Hamas was founded in 1987, and because of its militants, the Palestinians feel that Hamas is at least doing something more. And in terms of Hamas is not just a military organization, right? It is the government of Gaza. It is providing social services. The Ministry of Health in Gaza is a Hamas ministry. So Hamas is doing everything other than what the United Nations is doing is provided by Hamas. Hamas, there was an election in 2006. It is the only election that has ever been held, involving all of the Palestinian population in Israel-Palestine, and in that election in January of 2006, Hamas won the majority of the seats, both in the West Bank and in Gaza. Okay, and it won in Gaza by a much larger margin. But the popular notion is that Hamas seized power in Gaza from Fatah, and as if Fatah were the legitimate government in Gaza, and that was never the case. And the fact that Fatah is in control of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank is actually illegitimate, because they were not elected there. And what happened was that after the elections on January 25th of 2006, Israel proceeded to arrest all of the legislators who were elected from Hamas, and some also from Fatah, so that these legislators could not take their seats in the Palestinian National Assembly, and so we have no legitimate government. But the fact that we don't have a legitimate government is because of what Israel did. It's not because of what the Palestinians did. So the thing is that Gaza, that Hamas is not acting like a dictatorial power that has no legitimacy in Gaza. It doesn't mean that all Palestinians like Hamas. They probably think that it is authoritarian. It has its own corruption, not as much corruption as Fatah, but it has that much legitimacy in the sense that people feel that it is doing more both in terms of social services and in terms of responding to Israeli expulsions and military actions than anyone else is doing, and so even if all the Hamas fighters could be eliminated in Gaza, it would not stop Palestinian support for Hamas, right? And then of course the other thing is that, well, if you really could purge Hamas and all support from Gaza, who would replace it, and would Israel ever allow a free election in Gaza? Would Israel allow a free election in the West Bank? And these are open questions. So the only power that we've seen today, that at the UN Security Council, finally a resolution was agreed upon and passed to call for a humanitarian pauses, and well, it's better than nothing, right? It's better to have a humanitarian pause than to have no humanitarian pause. And that was only possible because the United States abstained from it. And it's a resolution that is almost identical to a previous one a couple of weeks ago that the U.S. vetoed. So it means that the pressure on the U.S. government from protests here, from protests around the world, from pressure from other governments, is starting to work a little bit. But it goes to the point that the only power on earth that can really move Israel to stop the bombing, to stop the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, to stop expelling the entire Gaza population into the Sinai Desert, is the United States. And Biden is basically, I mean, if you look at the news, it looks like, okay, he's pleaded with the Israelis to not attack the hospitals, and yet the Israelis did a full military assault on Ashifa Hospital, right? But the point is that Biden has not used all the options that he has. He's been very gentle. He's been saying, well, they shouldn't go in, they shouldn't do this, they shouldn't do that. But what about saying that, well, we're not going to allow our weapons to be used in attacking hospitals. We're not going to allow U.S. weapons to be used to attack ambulances. So the U.S. has that power, and then the U.S. has further power to say, to cut off the $3.75 billion in military aid that the U.S. provides every year. What if we say we're going to cut that, or we're going to eliminate that? And if that doesn't work, there's also sanctions, right? The U.S. uses sanctions against other countries. And why don't we use sanctions? So the U.S. has a lot of weapons, non-lethal weapons, let's say, to use to pressure Israel. It has not used them. And we're only asking to take this one step at a time. One step at a time to bring about a full ceasefire, because that, after all, is in everyone's interest. The ceasefire would enable an exchange of prisoners, right? So that Israel is holding something like 5,000 Palestinian prisoners, and well, it's about 7,000, but before that, before October 7th, it had about 5,000, and yeah, of course. And then we have the 239 people who are being held by Hamas. We need to get them released. So a ceasefire and getting these people released, should be the top priority, and stopping the bombing and the siege. Yeah. So this is it's the power, the future of Gaza is really in our hands, because it is the U.S. is the only power that has the power to turn things around, to change what's happening, and so anyway, that's what we need to do. This is a problem right here at home. It's not something that's just 8,000 miles away and we can turn a blind eye to it. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Donna.
So I just want to say that Max Blumenthal, who writes for The Intercept, exposed documents from the Israeli military that the damage that was done in the kibbutzim, in the kibbutzes that are along the so-called border with Gaza, that the great majority of Israelis who were killed, and the damage to the kibbutz and the cars and all the people running from the festival, it was done by the Israeli military. When they came into the area, they just went berserk in indiscriminate shooting and shelling the kibbutzim, the kibbutz houses, and the people who are running. They couldn't discriminate between the people running away and the Hamas fighters, or I call them resistance fighters, and even their numbers have come down, that instead of 1,400 civilians killed, it was 1,200, because 400 of the people that were killed were actually resistance fighters, the Palestinian resistance fighters. I think a day after the attack, Yasmin Porat, who's an Israeli who lives up in the north, was at the festival. She escaped to kibbutz Be'eri, and she said the Palestinian fighters who came in treated them very humanely, and one of them spoke English and said to her, "We are Muslim, we will not hurt you." If anybody looks into the previous genocidal assaults that Israel committed on Gaza, 2008 and 2009, 2012, 2014, 2019, and 2021, there was no brutal assault into Israel. There's no way that Hamas or any resistance fighters would go into Israel and kill that many Israeli Jewish civilians. They just wouldn't do it, because they know the brutality of the Israeli military and the settlers. So the reason that they went into that part of Israel was to get hostages, bring them back into Gaza, and use them, as many hostages as they could, civilians and military personnel, to get Israel to release the thousands of Palestinian prisoners inside Israeli prisons, including men, women, and children. And some of these prisoners have been in administrative detention for decades. So that was their purpose. They went after military bases, and every single kibbutz basically is armed. They have arms there. So, but they didn't go in to kill Jewish civilians. And there's plenty of proof about this. Stop condemning Hamas.
Okay, thanks. Well, I mean, I think there's still some controversy there about the going into the music festival, and I mean there was nothing military.
I have not
seen
proof that Hamas fighters were killing people running away. I haven't seen any proof of that. It makes no sense to me. None. I lived in Gaza for 4 months.
Yeah, but they captured some people who were in that festival.
Of course they captured them as hostages to get Palestinian prisoners released. That's what their purpose was. Not to kill people.
Anyone else? Other comment? Yes.
I just have like 2 questions, I guess. When it comes to like ceasefire talks and just the fact that they're talking about like turn down a hostage release or ceasefire offers, I guess how does the Hannibal Directive play into this? Because I know that Israel said they repealed the directive, but they probably replaced the similar, more extreme version or something. I'm not fully sort of educated on this.
I'm not understanding.
The Hannibal directives that said that IDF soldiers were allowed to indiscriminately fire on civilians in Charlotte and the hostages alike if there was a hostage situation to prevent use of hostages as leverage.
Uh-huh.
I guess how does that play?
Well, what I know is that, and this is from my experience, you know, with IDF soldiers, is that the soldiers have a lot of discretion as to what they should do in difficult situations, and so, I mean, the reason I mean, my experience comes from just simply going through checkpoints and just the experience in different checkpoints, is that it depends so much on the individual soldiers or the commanding officer at the checkpoint as to what they do. So in other words, the instructions are not very explicit, but they are more general about, you know, just, you know, that, you know, here's your broad mission, and then you just use your judgment. And because a lot of these soldiers are very young, they're you know, they don't have necessarily the best judgment, or they don't necessarily exercise restraint when they should be. So I mean, I don't have information on whether there were some specific directives, you know, in responding to October 7th. My suspicion is there aren't very many because it was an emergency response. Okay.
Well, they did blow up Erez. They did blow up that because they knew that was the control center, and resistance fighters had taken it over. So they just blew it up. They didn't care who got killed.
Yeah.
I guess just my second question is, seeing in the graph that's Fatah and Hamas is the main two parties, I just was wondering where the PFLP's place was in all this, because as far as I've read on it, until PIJ took the spot, I guess, I don't know, but they were the third largest political force in Palestinian politics.
Mm-hmm.
That's where has their place been exist since 1967?
Well, I mean, so these other groups, and what we're talking about are some of the other, you know, the secular militant groups which have a more Marxist or left ideology, and so these Palestinian groups, of course, they're still there, but they just are not as numerous as the Islamic organizations, and but if you go into the refugee camps, so certainly in a Jenin refugee camp, in Dahisha, I remember going into Dahisha refugee camp, which is in Bethlehem, and you know, there were lots of evidence of PFLP and DFLP, you know, people there, and so these organizations are still around, but in terms of their size, they're just at this point in time, they've kind of been eclipsed by the Islamists, and it's just, you know, what has happened. Yes.
Hamas exists outside of Gaza. Is that
Mhm.
correct?
Yeah.
In other countries?
Well, Hamas exists in the West Bank. Okay, and so I would say a few other things. So I have had some meetings with Hamas leaders in the West Bank, and one of the features of it was to understand that you know, there's a lot of misinformation, there's deliberate misinformation by Israel to try to demonize Hamas by saying that Hamas is an organization that is committed to the destruction of Israel and the expulsion of every Israeli, and that simply is not true. So the origin of this notion comes from the original Hamas charter of 1987, which says, okay, so the English translation of that original charter says that Hamas is committed to the obliteration of Israel. But I looked at the Arabic very carefully, and it's my interpretation that it is about the nullification of Israel as an exclusive Jewish state. So it's not about killing every Israeli. It's not about pushing every Israeli into the sea. It's about changing the state, the nature of the Israeli state. That Hamas does not accept a state that is exclusively for Jews and whose existence threatens the existence or the presence of Palestinians or non-Jews within the boundaries of Israel-Palestine. And that charter was also, amended in I think 2017. But the point is that this popular notion of what Hamas is based upon one translation that I could trace to Yale University, and that everybody else has just simply copied that without questioning it. So when I met with Hamas officials in the West Bank, one of the things, and this was in 2006. Okay, so it's not. I mean, it's true now, but even in 2006, they made it very clear that even though by that time the trend was already towards making the two-state solution more and more difficult, but they were still committed to the two-state solution. So just like Fatah, they are committed to the two-state solution, and that still remains their position today. And this is one of the ironies is that Hamas and the United States are still saying that we need to go back to the two-state solution, even though nobody is really making progress at going back to the conditions where that would have been possible. And what I mean by that is that if we go back to, so if we go back to 1993, we go back to the beginning of Oslo, there were very few settlements in here, and so the West Bank could have been, it would have been very easy to make this into a part of the Palestinian state, right? And the status of these settlements could have been, well, okay, the Palestinians, there's nobody, not even Hamas, says that the Palestinians who live in the West Bank should be expelled, not even in the West Bank. So if you create a Palestinian state, most Palestinians would say that the Israelis can stay. They have to say that. They have to say that because in Israel, if you have a Jewish state, okay, there's a large Palestinian population, a non-Jewish population in Nazareth, Tiberias, Haifa. Okay, so, and nobody wants them to be expelled. I mean, no Palestinian wants that. So the only solution is that if you do go back to a two-state solution, it would have to allow each state would have to allow a minority. You have a Christian and Muslim minority in Israel, and a Jewish minority in the West Bank.
But the two-state solution
Mm-hmm.
denies the right the international recognized right for the refugees to return home. Because there's 750, more
Right.
than 750,000 Palestinians were expelled by force from their land, from their homes,
Right.
inside what is called Israel.
Right.
And there were also many massacres in many villages. More than 500 Palestinian villages were totally destroyed and empty. The survivors of those massacres, the survivors of the depopulation, expulsion by force of those Palestinians, they have the internationally recognized right to return home to their lands inside what is called Israel. The two-state solution denies the Palestinian refugees that right. So the only solution is a one-state solution, that everybody has equity and equal rights, and not that Jews have Jewish supremacy over everybody else. Everybody can live there in peace. That is the only solution.
No, I agree. I agree that the two-state solution, does not. It would be very difficult under a two-state solution to ensure the right of return. And I personally, the other thing is that if you had a two-state solution, Israel has this insistence on controlling controlling the security of the entirety. So I mean, how are you going to get them to give up control over the security of the borders, right? I mean, for example, right now, the Allenby Bridge across the Jordan River is controlled by Israel, even though it's a crossing between the West Bank and Jordan. Okay, so it's just like the Rafah crossing. So Israel has not given up control over these kinds of security issues, and it seems. I mean, given what we know today, it's very unlikely that Israel would accept a Palestinian armed force that was independent of Israel. And so I agree that what has happened, because there are now so many settlements in the West Bank, that a more viable solution is just simply a one state. So combine into one state, but it has to be democratic. It has to be democratic in the sense that every Palestinian citizen has to have the same rights as every Israeli citizen, and it's something that the current Netanyahu government is moving further and further away from, and the only power that has any power to put any pressure on that government is, with sanctions if necessary, is the United States. But I believe that the United States can do this, and we can actually, and this is something that would be supported by the whole world, is a democratic single state. Sure.
So in 1948, 1949, the Zionists went and attacked Palestinians living throughout Palestine. And they so-called won the war. Israel won the war. So the Palestinians who were not expelled by force and the Palestinians who weren't killed, they were all under martial law for a period of at least 30 years. They had to get a permit to leave their village, whether it was to go to school or to go to work. They were limited as to what kind of work they could do. For those 30 years, none of them were even permitted to go to university to study. And I can't remember what the terms were as to what brought about the end of the martial law. but that eased up a tiny bit, so they no longer had to get a permit to travel around to leave their village. But can you imagine that overnight you're living in your own country where you've lived, you can trace your ancestry back for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and overnight, all of a sudden, you're not a citizen in your own country. You have no rights whatsoever, no human rights, no civil rights. Your language is no longer recognized as the language of the country. And this happens overnight. I mean, there were people who left on their own because they were terrified of, they wanted to protect their families, they wanted to protect their children, so they left. The people who were expelled by force, the refugees, they are still refugees to this day, whether they landed in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, refugee camps, wherever. They are still, to this day, 2023, stateless people. They do not have documents. They are stuck where they landed because they do not have a passport. They are stateless people. And this is a situation, it's a dire situation for anybody who lives under that kind of situation. And they are still, to this day, refugees. It's just horrendous what has happened. What happened to the Palestinian people is an abomination, a mass atrocity, a genocide, an ethnic cleansing, a Nakba that has been ongoing actually since before 1948-49, because the Zionists came into Palestine in the early 1920s and did whatever they could to establish a Jewish state. They were even killing Jewish Palestinians who didn't agree with their ideology, plus also lots of Palestinians and, of course, the British soldiers.
Okay. Thanks, Donna. Okay, it's past 8 o'clock, so if there are no further questions, I think we can wind it up. And thank you all for coming.